Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. More than 40 years ago, Egyptologist Mark Lehner and geologist Thomas Aigner conducted a study on the Sphinx, the Khafre Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple to try and prove the idea the temple blocks originate from the Sphinx enclosure, and, if correct, it would mean that the age of the creation of the Sphinx is likely the same age as the two temples in front of it. Therefore, the importance of the study cannot be underestimated, especially because, in terms of design, the Sphinx Temple certainly looks to be 4th dynasty, and secondly, surface luminescence dating that took place in 2013 placed the Sphinx Temple's construction well within the bounds of the 4th dynasty. Writing in the Giza Plateau Mapping Project Annual Report of 2016 to 2017, Mark Lehner wrote, and I quote, "We believe the Egyptians created the Sphinx and Khafre Valley and Sphinx temples as part of a single quarry construction sequence. From bedrock strata corresponding to the Sphinx head, they took megaliths for building the Khafre Valley Temple. As they quarried deeper, they cut a U-shaped ditch, leaving a core from which they sculpted the Sphinx, and removed blocks from these lower layers to build the Sphinx Temple." End quote. I agree it's a fair idea, even logical, and worth investing the time to research, because if it can be proved that the Sphinx was quarried to create the associated temples, it would be supporting evidence the Sphinx was a 4th dynasty construct. To test the hypothesis, Aigner logged each limestone bedrock layer on the Giza Plateau, including those present on the Sphinx core body, recording the lithic qualities and fossil content, and he assigned each limestone layer a number. Meanwhile, Lehner remapped the valley and Sphinx temples in detail, numbering each block. Aigner had identified 7 types of limestone at Giza, and these were labelled A to G. Lehner assigned each limestone block in the temples to one of the 7 layers, and colour-coded them so we can see where they came from. According to David Everett of the American Research Centre in Egypt, he said, quote, "This remapping showed where the quarrymen were working at a given stage of building the temples. Together, the geology and the temple mapping ultimately revealed a picture of how builders and quarrymen made the Sphinx and the 2 temples as part of a massive quarry construction landscape project." End quote. The project seemed to confirm the hypothesis that the valley and Sphinx temples were built using blocks that were quarried from around the Sphinx, not exclusively but in the main. And today, most authors and researchers will happily state this is a fact, without even looking for a scientific source. It's now in the global consciousness that the Sphinx Valley Temple and Sphinx Temple were created together, that they were part of one project. But did you know that Lehner and Aigner never actually published the results of the study? In the Giza Plateau Mapping Project Annual Report of 2016 to 2017, Lehner says, and I quote, "We had intended to publish this work but did not do so. And so, we work 37 years later to present the information. Here I summarise our method, broad conclusions, the significance of this information for dating the Sphinx, and how revisiting this old study adds a piece to the picture puzzle of how the Egyptians built the Sphinx and the pyramids." End quote. For such a significant study regarding the history and development of the Great Sphinx and Sphinx Temple complex, after all the controversy regarding the age of the Sphinx over the past 30 plus years, I do find it very strange that no paper was written or published. All we have are numerous summaries that can be found in various places, but there is no hard data, no admittance of the limitations of the method, no balanced discussions regarding the results, and so on. It's a scientific study where one interpretation of the results has become fact, without the data being released to the wider scientific community. It can therefore never come under scientific scrutiny because nobody has access to the data. For the rest of this video, I don't wish to complicate matters, so I won't be discussing the origins of the Khafre Valley Temple limestone blocks, which, in the main, are believed to have come from the harder Member 3 limestone layer, the same rock type the Sphinx head is made from. For a number of reasons, that subject will be for a separate video. Today I'm just focusing on the origins of the limestone blocks of the Sphinx Temple. Reading through the latest published summary of the work featured in the Giza Plateau Mapping Project Annual Report of 2016 to 2017, and we have a well-written method of how the work was undertaken, as well as helpful annotated pictures and diagrams. According to Lehner, most of the blocks that make up the Sphinx Temple came from the lower Sphinx chest area, coded in yellow on this diagram, which, as the author states, means the Sphinx statue must have risen unfinished in the solid mother rock only from the chest level when building began on the Sphinx Temple. But how do we know the Sphinx Temple blocks didn't come from another part of Giza? The Giza bedrock gently dips in a southeasterly direction, so the same limestone beds that make up the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure should also be found to the south and southwest, in the central field quarry. Therefore, how do we know the Sphinx Temple blocks didn't come from there? Limestone beds are not always homogeneous over a large area. Sometimes they are and sometimes they're not, so the only way to isolate the Sphinx enclosure as the origin of the Sphinx Temple blocks is to eliminate all other possibilities. Apparently, to some extent, this work was done, but for reasons unknown it just hasn't been published. Reading a 1985 study by Mark Lehner titled Giza: A Contextual Approach to the Pyramids, on page 137 he writes, quote, "Logs were also recorded from the bedrock exposures in the central field. A typology of core blocks was established on the basis of lithological and paleontological features. The attempt was then made to trace the individual and/or broad types of blocks to geological stratification and the horizontal distribution of faces within given units. In general, the study confirmed an earlier hypothesis that the core blocks of the Sphinx Temple derive from the quarry immediately to the west from which the Sphinx was cut." End quote. So apparently the work was done. Bedrock exposures in the central field were logged, and I assume that comparisons were made. We're told that in general, whatever that means, Lehner's hypothesis was confirmed, that the bulk of the Sphinx Temple blocks came from the Sphinx enclosure and not the central field. So why not publish this critical data, even in its raw form? Why can't other geologists and historical researchers critique this important study? I think the History for Granite channel said it best.
Considering how much difference of opinion there is about the geology in the limestone around the Sphinx, the "just trust me bro" explanation isn't very convincing. Even still, its likely documentation from over 40 years ago might get misinterpreted when reconstructing it. We are nowhere near a standard of extraordinary evidence.
Because how obvious was the data? How obvious were the changes in the limestone beds from the Sphinx Temple to the central field? Were the changes within the beds gradual or abrupt? Did they differ so wildly from 0 to 300 metres away? How did they differ? How many logs were made in the central field? 1, 2, 10 or more? Sadly, we really don't know anything. There's no detail, no data and no scientific paper. Because if only 1 or 2 logs were recorded in the central field, well, that wouldn't be all that helpful. And if the lateral changes in the limestone beds are only minor or fluctuating, which is very possible, then all we can get from a study such as this is that the Sphinx Temple blocks came from Giza, and there is no real way of knowing which part. Maybe the results were not as strong as they'd hoped, and that could be the reason why no paper was published. because the interpretation could be challenged by other geologists. There is also another strange observation noted by Lehner. He admits that the Type B and Type D blocks in the Sphinx Temple, which show up at regular intervals within the walls, do seem to have come from the central field quarries, over towards the tomb of Khafre, because these types of limestone are not even found in the Sphinx enclosure. And this is quite a strange discovery, and in my opinion, is somewhat harmful to the hypothesis being tested, because there would surely be enough stone in the Sphinx enclosure to build the Sphinx Temple. Why go to all that effort of dragging blocks from a few hundred metres away when we are told the temple was directly in front of a working limestone quarry? And it's not like blocks B and D inside the temple are clear repair blocks, or localised inside the temple in a specific place, or used for a specific function. They're scattered throughout the structure. The important point to take home in this video is that no detailed geological mapping of Giza has been published, and due to the dip of the natural limestone bedrock, we know that the units of rock that make up the Sphinx monument do run through the central field quarry, and extend at least as far as the tomb of Khafre. Without the data, without the comparable geological logs from the central field, we are simply taking one man's word for the origins of the majority of the blocks in the Sphinx Temple. Unless the raw geological data becomes public, we really have no reason to accept the conclusions of this 40-year-old study. I do think we have fair reason to question what we are told, because we do know that blocks labelled B and D in the Sphinx Temple did come from further afield. Therefore, it is perfectly fair to assume that all the blocks did as well, that all of the stone used in this one construction project came from one part of Giza. Today, the Sphinx Temple is in a ruinous state, and there are indications the structure we see today was actually a second phase construction. According to Egyptologist Herbert Rick, the north and south colonnades of the temple were later additions. The middle part of the north and south walls were pushed back, and large limestone core blocks were added to the outside corners. This meant the boundaries of the structure were extended on the northern and southern sides, and there is strong evidence to suggest that the Phase 2 work was not completed. It's unknown if the internal layout of the temple changed during the second phase or not, but during Phase 2, the interior of the temple certainly looks to have been well advanced. We know the temple was not completed though, because there is no evidence for any external cladding. There are no cuts in the core limestone for exterior cladding, and there are no traces of any casing stone foundations. There is also an unfinished cutting related to the temple's extension in the Sphinx's north enclosure wall and what appears to be an unfinished area in front of the temple. So, if what we're looking at is Phase 2 of the structure, how much time was there between Phase 1 and 2? Was it a change in plan before or maybe after the Phase 1 structure was completed? If the latter, were there decades or even centuries between the two? Did the function of the building change between Phase 1 and Phase 2? There is more evidence I can present, but I'll save that for a future video. As I hope you can see, nothing is simple when it comes to understanding the origins of both the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple, and without a detailed geological map of the entire Giza Plateau that shows both vertical and lateral changes in the limestone bedding, in truth, there is no way of knowing where the stone came from to build the Sphinx Temple. Yes, the bulk of the limestone blocks could have been removed from the Sphinx enclosure. The blocks could have been from an earlier dismantled structure that occupied the same space and may be supplemented with freshly quarried stone during the reigns of Khufu or Khafre. Another option is that the Sphinx enclosure was already dug out long before any structure existed in front of it, and so all of the stone came from the quarries to the south and southwest. Without the data from Lehner and Aigner's experiment, and without a full geological map of the Giza Plateau, the summary of the study offers no specific scientific conclusion as to where the blocks of the Sphinx Temple came from on the Giza Plateau, and it certainly doesn't help us get any closer to understanding the age of the Great Sphinx. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.